And hello again, and here we are back on my drive on quite a nice day, and in front of me I have by far my longest running project. I bought this bike more than 10 years ago and it's still not finished, and I mentioned it in a video a few weeks ago where I went through my outstanding projects, all 5 of them, and this is one of those outstanding projects. And now finally its time has come for me to try to get this bike finished at last. So what needs to happen to get this bike on the road at last? Well, first of all, I've got to rewire the bike. Back in January I did make a start on changing things that I didn't like about the bike, and one of those things was the whole dashboard area. It only had a speedo and no tacho, which I didn't like. It had a separate idiot light pod, which I didn't like, and it had the ignition key where you would expect it on here, which I didn't like. So I ripped all that out, and instead I fitted a combined tacho and speedo unit with integrated idiot lights by Cosso, which is on the bike right now. And to do that, of course, I had to make a new mounting bracket for it, which wasn't much of a problem. What was more of a problem was the fact that these units have a huge amount of wiring attached to them. So of course all the wiring had already done had to be ripped out, and I've got to start again. And that made me think about the M unit that I'd fitted a few years ago now. I think this was the first bike I ever used an M unit for. That is to say, an M unit is an electronic control box made by the German company Moto Guzzi. Very clever, very high tech. But I decided it was probably too high tech for this bike. It didn't need to be as complicated and as sophisticated as it was. So I also removed that as well, and I replaced it with another electronic control box from Germany, this time from a guy called Axel Just, and that's called a DBox, and it's a much simpler system, much simpler box, much smaller. It's also waterproof, which is great. So that's now been put on the bike, and I got halfway through wiring that up when I stopped back in January. So that work needs to continue, and I've got to complete the wiring of the DBox and everything else on the bike. So the electrics have to be sorted out. Next thing we've got to do is sort out the battery. I designed the bike to use a then brand new high-tech lithium ion battery. Very small it was, and it sat here in this triangle on its own little cool stainless steel battery box. But it turns out that using those old lithium ion batteries from 7-8 years ago with an old Italian charging system that my bike's got is not a good idea. So back in January I bought the correct spec old-fashioned lead acid battery for this bike and tried to fit it, and I had a problem because it wouldn't fit. I was trying to fit the battery this way through the triangle of the frame, just wouldn't fit. And it wouldn't fit because, I've since found out, you're supposed to drop that battery down between the seat rails of the bike. It then sits on top of the gearbox here on its own little pressed steel battery tray. So that didn't work. I can't do that on my bike because underneath the seat I've got the new electrics box full of electrics. I've also got some bracing that's been welded across the seat rails there, so that's no good. Now my bike is 1000cc, and the bike that followed mine is 1100cc, but that didn't have a 30 amp hour battery. That may do with a 19 amp hour battery. So sure enough, asking the Guzzi experts said, yeah, no problem, you can use a 19 amp hour battery on your bike without a concern. And the good news is they're a lot smaller, and the one I've got my eye on is made by a company called Moto Bat. Right, what else did I do back in January? Well, I fitted this. This is a Le Mans Mark 1 fairing. So what else have I got to do? Once I've finished the electrics, I've then got to finish, actually this mounting isn't quite right yet. There's a mount low down which controls the angle of it. Right now it's angled up too far back, it needs to go up a little bit. But to fit that cockpit fairing, I had to lose the braided brake hoses I'd fitted to the bike years ago because they got in the way. So I've got to make up some new brake lines or measure what I need to do, get them made and get them fitted on the bike. The other thing I had to lose to fit the cockpit fairing was the indicators. They were mounted to the brackets which hold on the headlamp right about here, and of course they get in the way, so they had to go. So I've got to find a way of mounting a pair of indicators to the front of the bike that doesn't affect this fairing. So what shall we do first? Well, I'm going to remove the seat and the tank, put them away somewhere safe. And so now looking at the bike, here we have the electrics box, and in it we have the new DBox from Axel Joost. And the good news is it's very clearly labelled as to what wire does what, not only on here but also on each wire: ignition, brake light, low beam and so on. And there are two sets of wires here. There's the output wires, which are all the purple wires, quite thick wires, and then there's the multicoloured wires below them. You see them down there, and they are the input wires. They take signals from various parts of the bike, mainly the handlebar switches, and also things like the front and rear brake lights, that sort of thing, the brake switches, because then that will convert that to make the rear brake come on, and so on. So yeah, it's all pretty straightforward and much simpler to use than the Moto Guzzi M unit. It's also much smaller and looks pretty waterproof, unlike the M unit. However, before I start to wire up the bike, I need a guide, I need a wiring diagram, and to that end, back in January I made my own, and here it is on a big A3 sheet of paper, folded in pencil, so I can change it as required. And it's basically, yeah, just tells you which colour wire goes where, and at the centre of it is a box here which represents the DBox. So also on here we've got the charging system, starter motor, we've got the handlebar switches, which by the way are from Moto Guzzi. They're really cool little micro switches. On the back I've got all the wiring for the Cosso Speedo tacho unit, and I might even change it in the future. If I'm doing something I realise, oh hang on, I can improve that, I'll change it, I'll change the colour, I'll change something, then I can just redraw it out. It doesn't take too long, maybe an hour or two, but it's well worth doing because it's my guide to the wiring of the bike. So yeah, you wouldn't really attempt to wire up a bike without a wire diagram. So since this bike is so different from standard, you've got to make your own. Right, so another job I need to do, which I've been putting off, is to make up the HT lines to go from spark plugs to the coils. Or in my case, I've only got one coil. Now normally on a Guzzi you have two separate coils, but I fitted a rather special coil taken from the aftermarket Harley scene, and that's two coils in one body. It's quite a clever bit of kit, and it lives down there, here where my hand is. I'm not sure you can tell, it's very black so it's difficult to see, but normally the coils sit in fact on this side in the gap here where the triangle is. So I moved it from there because I want to access that triangle to get at the battery, and we fitted it here. It's very difficult to see, I guess, it's all black and difficult to see, but you see here. And even though this bike is a 1989 model, it still retains a distributor which is right down there between the cylinders, difficult to see. And I hate old-fashioned, you know, points ignition. I've had such a problem with my old Z650 that I've changed it all to a modern Dyna S ignition system, but you can get aftermarket electronic systems to replace this distributor, but they're like about £500, so I think we'll live with that old tech for the time being. But anyway, I've got to make two leads to go from spark plugs to that coil, and to do that I've got these Dyna HT leads here, and when you buy them they're really long and they have the plug side already wired in. So what you've got to do is measure what you need. I'll just put that on the plug like that and then run it wherever you like, sort of, I don't know, wherever it is, through there. As I say, it's very awkward. I wish now I hadn't put it where I put it, but it's very neat and you can't really see it, but it does make life a bit more complicated when you're trying to wire it up. So I've got the wire here, the lead here. I can see it's going to go that way, that way, that way, and it'll end up going into the coil, something like that. It's a bit short, actually it's a bit long, so take a bit more off. Something like, let's get that central, something like that, maybe, yeah. So my fingers are now where I think I should cut the damn thing, so let's just keep that held there like that. We'll pull it back out again. So we're going to cut it here. I'll do that with my pliers like that. Right, so that's that one done. And I'll repeat the process. You see, it's so long it'll fit pretty much any bike, you know. So we'll now come round and repeat the process on this side. And then all I've got to do is wire up the connectors, the terminal where it goes into the coil. And luckily this coil is made the same way as a dyno coil is, so it all just fits pretty well. And so if we look at the HG lead itself, you can see it's got 3 layers. It's got the black outer sheath, it's got this white insulation layer, and then right in the middle it's got the actual electric current carrying core. What we've got to do is remove the black and the white parts of this cable, but don't touch the central wire core. And we're going to do that. We're going to go back about 15 millimeters back from the end of the wire, and to do that you need a very sharp knife. In my case I've got a craft knife here. What I'm going to do is just cut through very gently all the way around, but don't cut that central wire. You can tell as you're doing it because it'll actually change the feel of it. It'll start to get feel different when you hit the wire in the middle. So let me just put down this microphone and let's just do that. We'll go back about 15 millimeters, something like that, and just go around it very gently and cut through the black outer sheath and the white insulation layer. When you get deep enough to touch the wire, you can feel the difference. You can feel a slight kind of abrasiveness, so that's when you stop. Alright, so I'm just going around there now. Now luckily for me, I've got a pair of wire strippers which will work on this just about. So if I now get them, here they are. I'll just push that through there, make sure the cut is right in the middle of the pliers like that. And what it does, it just grips it and then pulls them apart like that. There we go. That was easy, wasn't it? You don't have to use this, you could just use your hands, but it's much easier to use that little tool. So here we have the central wire. That's what carries the current down from the coil to the spark plug. So next then, let's remember, we've got to fit this. This is the rubber boot. Put it on first, otherwise you'll never get it on if you forget. Don't ask me how I know. Right, so with that rubber boot on the lead, we now need to attach this. This is the terminal which will go onto the coil. So to do that, what we do is, it's actually quite simple. We just have to push this around like that. We push it back against itself, you see there? And then we push this like that. So that inner wire is now bent back and it's touching this terminal like that. And now what we've got to do is crimp this terminal onto the lead. And to do that, I guess you can buy some special gear, but I just got a pair of Kipex pliers like this, adjustable ones, and these work really well. These, by the way, are parallel jawed pliers. They're really cool. See that? Let me just show you how it works. It's adjustable, but when they close, they're parallel to each other, which is great. I find it very helpful, very useful. And you just got to slowly just clamp it together very gently, like that. I'm not sure if it's in shot, but I'll try it. Right, so I'm slowly clamping it nice and tight. And so, just to repeat myself, the inner core, the wire, is now bent back on itself and it's against the inside of this terminal, so it's got a very good connection, which is what you want. So now I can push this back again and that can go into the coil. And now there they are, fitted to the bike, and that's another job completed. And so I am making progress with the wiring. I've now wired up most of the wires from the Cosso instrument here back down the frame to the electrics box. while here in the electrics tray where the DBox lives, things aren't quite so neat. I've got wires everywhere, it's a bit of a mess, and that's okay. I'll tidy it up once I know all these electrical circuits work okay. And so my next task is to wire up the indicators. So the two rear indicators are easy, they're here, the wiring's here, no problem. But the front indicators aren't quite so straightforward, because right now I don't know where they're going to go. They can't go where they used to live because the Le Mans Mark 1 fairing's in the way, and I've not yet decided the best place to put them. I could make a bracket, I guess, to go up and have them here, but then that's getting awfully close to the levers. I could take a bracket down here. That would look pretty bad. So what I could do is mount them on a bracket on a bar that sits below the headstock down here. So they'll come out here. And that's the way a Le Mans Mark 1 and 2 had their indicators mounted. There's actually a bracket here that I'm using right now to hold the rectifier, but yeah, you've got a bracket and it goes across here, a bar, away you go. Only slight problem with that is that obviously the indicators I've got aren't meant to go and be fitted to a bar, so I'm not sure how to handle that yet. I don't want to change the indicators because I like them, so we'll have to come up with a solution. So since I don't know exactly where they're going to go, what I've got here is the appropriate coloured wire, and I'm just going to cut a huge long length of it to go from here all the way to the front of the bike. It's going to be far too long, but at least I can get it wide in, and then if it's too long I can cut it back and fit it to the indicators wherever they're going to be. So that's what's next. And now I've just finished fitting the two sleeve wires here for the two front indicators. So they're all zip tied in place and they go back to the DBox at the back of the bike. Now I'm not quite sure yet how long these wires should be, and that's why they're far too long for the time being, but I can cut them back when I know precisely where the front indicators are going to live on the bike. And now I'm getting to the point where I can start to test out the various circuits I've been building today. So I think I'll start off with the Cosso Speedo tacho unit. So I've got power going directly to that unit. So if I now connect up this cable to my test battery, it should actually light up the Cosso unit for the very first time. So here goes. Well, that wasn't too bad, was it? At least it didn't blow up. It did light up as I thought it should, so that's not bad. So now I'm going to continue that process, just testing out the various circuits that I can with my little test battery. This is a very small 12-volt test battery that I've got, and it's great because it doesn't have enough power to burn out wires, just in case you got something wrong and yeah, you suddenly find you've got a lot of smoke coming from the bike. So yeah, I like using this one just for the first few tests, just to make sure everything's okay. Right, so I shall now continue that process, but not today, it's a bit late now, so we'll continue tomorrow, and hopefully we should soon get this bike lighting up as it should. And so let's now talk about batteries, and here we have the 30 amp hour Ueta battery that was recommended for my bike, which, as I've already mentioned, doesn't fit in my bike anymore. So I've ordered a new battery, slightly smaller, which hopefully will work just as well, and it's just arrived, and here it is. A strange looking battery, you must admit. This is by Moto Bat. It's an AGM battery, which means you can sit it in any position you like. It doesn't have to be upright. So let's see if this new battery will fit in my bike. And so we'll start off by seeing if the battery will fit when I'm using this 10mm thick aluminium tray I made about, God, I don't know, 6-7 years ago. So we'll pop him on top of the gearbox first. I'll just rest it on there for now. There's no need to bolt it down like that. And then the battery will sit like this with the terminals at the front. That way the cables are less visible when they come up this way rather than going at the back. So let's now just ease him in here nice and gently. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, even with the plate in place, there's plenty of clearance to fit the battery in the frame, so that's fine. So I now need to find a way to secure this battery in the frame, and that's not so simple, but let's take him out of here. So how do we secure the battery to the bike? And to that end, I think what I'll do is I'll use the fact this is 10mm thick, which is far thicker than it needs to be. And what we'll do is I'll get my friend Jeff to mill out a 5mm recess in this plate which mimics the shape of this battery. That way the battery will sit in this tray by about 5mm. That should help to secure it to the bike. But that's not enough, so we can also then bolt some kind of brackets to this thing, so then I can mount 1 or 2 straps to hold the battery securely to this plate. And of course the plate is bolted to the gearbox and to the back of the frame, so that should be fine. So now I need to take this tray and the battery to my friend Jeff's workshop to see if we can mill out the shape I need. I can't do that just yet because I know he's having problems right now with power to his workshop, so I'm not quite sure if he's resolved that issue yet or whether he still can't use his miller, but we'll soon find out. So yeah, that might have to wait. So with that sorted out, in theory, let's move on to the next job. And now I've just collected the battery and battery tray from Jeff's workshop, where we agreed a kind of different way of mounting it to this tray. His miller's still out of commission, or rather the power's still out of commission, so we couldn't really mill it, so we've come up with a different solution, and that solution is as follows. So what we do is we plonk the battery on something like that. In fact, let me bring in the camera and I'll show you how it works. Right, so here's the battery on the tray, and what we've done is we've drilled and tapped 4 holes in the tray around the battery. So for the front we've got this bracket here which sits something like that. Now all this is a bit work in progress because we didn't know at the time, or Jeff didn't know precisely how thick any kind of foam I want to use on this thing to protect the battery might be, so we can always tweak it a bit as required. So you can see there he's left a really big gap. In fact, I think that's a bit too big, but I can always rebend this top of this bracket here, it's not really a problem. Then at the back we've got these long stainless bolts and these tubes, aluminium tubes, which we put inside there like that. And there you go. On this plate here, this strap actually goes, get it right, there you go at first, then they go on there like that, and that screws in there. Once again, these screws might be a little bit too long, the bolts rather, but that's okay, we can always tweak them a bit. Want to know precisely how thick any kind of foam or mat I want to use to protect the battery from any vibration. In fact, I have bought myself some neoprene sheet which is sticky on one side. Just arrived and I bought 2mm, and I think that's a little bit too thin. It will work, but I think I'll buy some more that maybe is 5mm, something like that. So now we just have to imagine that's like that, so that's going to clamp down there, and once it's all clamped down this is not going anywhere. What I could also do, of course, is I can find some kind of foam tubing to put around these posts just to give it a bit more protection. That might be a bit over the top, might not need to, but when all that's tightened up this battery is going nowhere, which is the whole point. As I say, I do want to use some kind of foam or some kind of well, in my case I think I'll use neoprene sheet. You can get in different thicknesses, you know, 2mm, 3mm, 4mm, 5mm. I think I'll go for 5mm. I can double it up then to get 10mm. And the good news about neoprene is it's not affected by water, it doesn't degrade over time, so that's why I like to use it, unlike foam. So yeah, that's kind of how it will look when it's done. But I can't just fit it like this, because once it's on the bike it's going to be very difficult to keep clean and polished. And as you can see, the plate I originally used is fully polished, or was. It's a bit scratched up now, but yeah, I won't be able to really polish this thing going forward. So what I want to do is find a really tough finish that will look good on the bike, which will match the bike in some way, and I'll refinish. You can see that's got checker plate stuff, and I'll refinish, I'll recoat all these parts the same way. I could do them black, get them all powder coated, that's pretty easy, but that's a bit boring. So what I think I might do is go to Camcoat and say, look, what have you got that's really hard wearing that works on aluminium? And I suspect they're going to say, oh, I know, hard anodizing, because that is hard. It's very tough finish. The anodizing sits in the surface of the piece, it doesn't sit on top, so it's very difficult to scratch off, as I know to my cost when I tried to remove it in the past. So yeah, I probably will get it hard anodized. Black, silver, you know, pink, red, I don't know. I'll come up with an answer. Still got to do a bit more work on these things, get them all polished up, or maybe give them a sort of satin finish so it looks all the same when it's on the bike, because anodizing really doesn't change the finish of a piece, it just changes the colour. You can see here it's now scratched with the battery sitting on it. So yeah, that's kind of where we're up to so far. I'm still waiting to receive a bit more parts for this particular assembly, such as the neoprene sheet. I've got 2 mil on order, but I think that's not going to be enough, so I might order some more, maybe 5 mil, something like that. But yeah, that's kind of how it will look when it's on the bike. I've now got to just work out a way of giving these parts the same treatment that look good and have a very hard wearing finish. And so now it's the next day, and I've just had a delivery of neoprene sheet here, and as you can see, I've already cut out the shape of it, of the battery. I've stuck it on the side of the battery, so now it's sitting on 6 mils worth of neoprene sheet, nicely cushioned. And with that in place, I could then shorten these spacers so that they're the correct length to mount comfortably on the battery. I've also rebent this front bracket here so it also sits nicely on the battery. So next then, I need to refinish all these aluminium parts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give them all a kind of satin brushed finish, maybe using wet and dry sandpaper, maybe 400 grade, something like that. But first I've got to remove all the little nooks and scratches and whatever that are in these aluminium parts. Once I've done that, I'll take these aluminium parts to Camcoat and ask them to hard anodize these parts. I think I'll get them done in silver. I think that will closely match the finish on the rest of the engine around it, on the gearbox, so it'll sort of just fit in. I don't want this stuff to stand out. I mean, the bloody bright yellow battery stands out quite enough, thank you very much. So I think just keeping it the same finish as the rest of the gearbox and the engine will work quite well. So yeah, that was actually pretty straightforward. So now, as I say, I've just got to clean up these parts and get them off to Camcoat. And now this video's getting quite long, so I think we'll end it soon. However, in part 2 of this reboot series, I've still got an awful lot to do. So for example, I've got to sort out the front brake lines. I've got to sort out mounting the front 2 indicators. Got to continue with the wiring harness and get everything plugged into the DBox here, and right now, by the way, that's not going too well. It's not responding the way I think it should, so I need to do a bit more research and a bit more investigation as to why the DBox isn't doing what I think it should do. Other jobs I've got to do include sorting out the throttle linkage and the cables, which might sound quite simple, but on a Guzzi it's not, and I've modified or changed the standard system to something else for various reasons that I'll go into in part 2, but right now I've got an issue with that. So yeah, there's still lots to do, and who knows, perhaps at the end of part 2 we might get to the point of trying to get this engine to fire up for the first time in more than 10 years, and certainly the first time since I've owned the bike, because I've never heard the damn engine run since I bought the bike as an incomplete project all those years ago. So that's it for now then, so thanks for watching and cheers.